قالوا انت شكون عيط لك؟ قالوا كيفاش شكون عيط لي؟ ريم عيطت لي ولا مريم ولا شكون؟ قالوا انا راني فلان الفلاني زعما طلع ما يعرفوش. قالوا باهي. قال يا اخي كلمني قال لي خير يا اخي جيتي جات بالواحد وانا جو لونكوراجي ما هو اللي مريض الكل. ديزني مسكين علاش عرفتي باش يخرج. وقتاش جاب لو كونسير؟ كامل بريسك. خاطر احمد التونسي ديك اللي été opéré 2 fois وعمل دي سيونس دو شيميو.
تحبحي ما هو عندك سي كوز دو لوبيراسيون مسكين.
لا هذيك عنده من قبل هذيك من قبل
اكوز دو سا معناتها اكوز دو لا مالادي. حاسي لو انا وليت نشجع فيها هكا كي تبدا عندي ماتيني ولا حاجه نقول ويش نمشي نخرج شويه. خاطر مره قال لي انا نسامي العباد يا اخي جو بونس كو جو سوي مورون.
لطف عليه
يا اخي كلمت عليه سليم قلت له معنا سي سليم كي تبدا هكا ان بتيت ايفينمون اون ماتيني ولا كونفيرونس دو بريس او كان ناخذ بريسك تو نعطيه هو 10 مينوت ان كار دور يخرج فيها ويلبس ويشوف العباد.
ابسوليومون
يا اخي في هذه انا جلي حسيت كلموا قالوا لي اكلوا لي زاد فريد الرحالي قال لي مدام شبيهم قتلوني. قلت له والله يزون ريدوي ليكيب وباش يعملوا من لونجلي للعرب والعرب لونجلي والانجلي عرب وانت باش تعمل تاخذ كان الفرنسي. سيغتينمون راهو منظر قعد بوتيتر فايسه بوتيتر سلمى
هذاك ليفينمون تاع البوسطه هذاك.
اي هذاك يمكن اوليو دو
اليوم
لا انا لانه ما مشيتش
اوليو دو 6 دونك اوليو دو 6
يا عجبك.
قالوا باش يعملوا كلوتور اليوم ساعتين.
ان شاء الله. انا ريتو عملها طول فوا يجي الديرني جور يقول لك والله نحاول كابين فرونسيز والله نحاول كابين عرب والله.
فرحت شويه الكابين.
يا
خير
ما روحنا شويه سوا خير من بكري والله احنا استانسنا بالصلاة الله اعلم. تعرف الاكزامبل نتاع الجيران او الشونجمون كليماتيك.
خير انا كنت اللوطه الان حسيت
وهو معناتها تو انت كرهتي ليفينمون كان بعلي كان ما كونترا وكيفاش تبطل على 40 يوم. هاي هو سهير اخر مره مشيت ولا ماشيه ولا ما نعرف. سلوى واروى كابين فرانسيز اون برانسيب باش يباتوا يخدموا اليوم وغدوه في سوسه. فهمت؟ دور نهارين مش 4 و5 ايام كما نهار اثنين دور نحاول هذه فيها سونتي سو كيت لا لوجيك ميم.
اكثر من هكاك انا ما عرفتش قال لي ظهر لي زاد سهير ولا
انا عرفتهولك تاع
الاترونجي مشاو 2 جور ما خدموش
ما
خدموش ايزون تيتي
ولا على الاترونجي هوني انا في البال متقاعدين جو دي بيان الفم ما تحلش عارف معناتها ما تحلش وجاو زاد ديزولي يا مدام زعما بوتيت ايكيب. À l'époque, j'ai touché plus de 613 دولار ولا à l'époque. اللي هما زعما خاطر هما يخلصوا في الكيب واحده 400 ولا حاجه 400 ولا 400 وبخاطر انا زعما حنايا وانا فين ما حليتوش لا 613 باغ جور. اي عزيزي ça fait quelque temps 600 خاطر هما يباي 400 et quelques par jour en grande équipe.
وانتي عملتوا
تتصرف باش تحكي شوفوا قلت حد ما حلفهم حد ما حلفهم المو يعمروا فيها بالكبير.
لا هو مش اول مره انا شفته يعملها. شفته حضرت عليه مره ولا في الاتيكا يعملها يجي اخر نهار يقول لك والله يرغدوي ليكيب باش ما يعملوا.
ايه من الاول غدوي من الاول راح حسابك قول باش نبدا ب 4 واحد.
لا ما هو كونتراتو ب 5 جور دونك.
ايه كونتراتو ب 5 جور نعرف يربح وعليا بعد كان هو في العمر هذا ولا ما كنت
هكا عاد نحكي الفيصل قلت وليدش عمل مو غازني انا سورتو منجي تربيه غازني.
منجي دونك devait être
في فرنسا ما يعملش كذا. يا اخي قال لي دو شو يا باي واحد يعارك يقول له لا اسكت خلاص tu m'as bloqué pour la journée
absolument.
artiste.
مش تخرج معاه قول
قلت لك دونك اليوم كملت هيا سيدي عندنا وهره هي وجمال عندنا ما فاتك كنت كرهت في المرايس رسمها pendant toute la soirée. تاش عامله في وشها.
عامله بوتوكس وقت.
How do you know? اسألوا هذا يخدم ولا شنو الطفل سكر فرع.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, we remind you to stay, to keep quiet and to respect the atmosphere of quietness and to keep your mobiles shut.
You're gonna go on streaming. Nobody asked you.
Now that this issue has been introduced, we would like to invite you to watch this video. IVD received 22 cases on what is known as the Buckshot Affair in Salina in 2012, including a group file. 16 of these cases have been submitted for arbitration or reconciliation. 12 have been actually also referred to the courts, and the IVD is committed to reveal certain facts according to provision 4 by defining these violations and identifying their causes, contacts, and its source, as well as their historical contacts, but also perpetrators and those and the results thereof. Article 48 of Transitional Justice also provides for the courts to repeal or to reject any form of pursuing or continuing the investigations in these affairs, despite if it is undertaken by IVD. But the public prosecution and the military court in 2017 issued a statement knowing that IVD holding a public hearing on the affairs in Salina and violates the privacy of the investigation. And the public prosecution also obliged that all authorities should not violate any form of investigation underway. IVD has actually challenged this, but stating that Article 48, dated 24 December 2013, related to transitional justice, it provides for the following. That the work of the IVD settles all forms of statutes of limitation, and the articles of the Constitution obliges the IVD also to be part of the transitional justice, and this also is enforceable on all forms of judiciary. But then if this is considered as a violation, this also would be applied to almost all other events, including the events of the revolution, as stated by the public prosecutor of the criminal court by not responding to the request of IVD to have access to the cases pending, which is a violation of Articles 40, 51, 52, 53 of the transitional justice, which gives IVD the authority to have access to all cases, pending cases, all decisions by these courts. Meanwhile, IVD, as part of investigations in what is known as the Buckshot Affair in Salina, has proceeded to the hearing of the victims, but also to witnesses, and the report of the Independent Commission, as well as the report of the High Commission for Human Rights, but IVD has not been able to have access to the report of the Ministry of Interior, despite many correspondences with the ministry. A large number of witnesses accepted to give their testimonies to IVD, which has revealed a very good part of this truth. But IVD saw the rejection of some of the actors to provide their testimonies, exception basically trade unionists, the police, and some politicians, which is also a violation of Article 66 of Transitional Justice Law, which provides for the obligation of providing witnesses input. Salina was established as a governorate in 1974, and it is situated in the northwest at 125 kilometers from Tunis, the capital. It is divided into 11 circumscription delegations and 86 imadas, and its population is 223,000. It was 245,000 in 1994. And 235,000 in 2004. According to the results of the population census for 2014 because of exodus. The area is known for its deep history, but also it was an encounter of Numidian, Punic, Roman, Byzantine, and Arab cultures. And it was also a regional government location for Jama, and it was also known for the various other phases in the current time, as its inhabitants took part in the Ali bin Ghulam revolution in 1864. The Ahmed ibn Abi Diyaf is known as one of is known as being of origin of the origin is Siliana as historian. The region also fought against French occupation through the revolution rebellion led by Muhammad Ali Ayari, but also after the Bargo battle held 1954 November 13, during which the French occupier suffered important losses. The area is known for its large cultivation areas and 40 quarries for marble and sand and stones. It contains over 1,800 historical sites, and the governorate is known also for its caves, including the Ain Dhab cave. So the area is known as opposition, and it was part of the Yusufs during that time. And then also important other movements, opposition movements. The area is also known throughout history for a number of important opposition leaders in Tunisia. Despite all the wealth of the region and important natural resources and historical sites, the area is known for marginalization socially and economically, as it is at the bottom of the local indicators in 2012. The social situation in Siliania is known for the high level of poverty, which exceeded the national average and reached 17%. And poverty led to exodus as the number of the inhabitants regressed from 245,000 in 1994 to 223,000 in 2014. This exodus is also caused by the absence of the lowest and the basics of dignified living. Illiteracy represents 32% and reaches 40% in Kisra and Rohaya, while the governorate also includes 2 higher education institutions only. The health services remain very limited compared to the rest, as the governorate lacks important basic infrastructure, especially the absence of the specialized doctors, whose number was 42 in 2012 to 31 in 2015. There is also one only dialysis center. As for the road network, 80,000 of regional and local roads are not paved. Besides, about 20,000 of kilometers of road dirt trucks, despite the importance of these dirt trucks in the agricultural development of the region. The relationship, the connection to, for example, Jendouba has to go through El Kaf, which is important. Like in terms of hygiene, there is an important pollution of water supplies, as the rivers have been used as dumping ground. There is also the important impact of erosion, which has reached 72%. The important increase in poverty level has to do also with unemployment rates, which has reached 17.5% in 2016 and has exceeded 27% in Rohaya. And this is especially because it has not taken into consideration the specifics of the region, especially in agriculture and industry, when the state has developed its plans. Although Siliana is an agricultural area par excellence, covering 431,000 square kilometers of arable lands and agricultural lands, with very low return because of the poor return of the agricultural lands available to development farms. The industrial sector is also limited, and this has to do especially with the limited and the poor road network linking Saliana to the rest of the region, which led to isolation of Saliana, leading to a lack of investments, despite the importance of its resources. Investment in tourism has been very limited by the public and private sectors. This investment does not exceed 0.3%. The development problems in Saliana has to do with the excessive centralization and important other problems, as the projects planned for 2012 were 346 projects for a global investment of 222 million dinars. However, a large number of these projects has been met with important obstacles, including procedural ones related to the public procurements, slow implementation, lack of resources, which led to suspending, for example, the development of a local museum, problems related to real estate property, problems related also to suspending some works by the entrepreneurs, which has led to canceling the contracts and the renew of another one. Besides other problems related to the security context, and to face such problems, on 7th November 2012, a meeting was held in Saliana in order to monitor the projects in the region, as the number of delayed projects reached 27 projects for a total cost of 551,760,000 dinars, including the development of an industrial area in Crib for 3 million dinars. 10 projects in agriculture for about 5.4 million dinars. 3 projects in sewage treatment, including a plant in Maktar in Bouarada, and all the projects for about 12 million dinars. 4 projects in the roads, including the development of the road number 80 for a global amount of 17 million dinars. 3 projects in the health sector, including a ward for women's diseases and mother and child care. A project for the development of a museum and a public park suspended for the unavailability of funds of 800,000 dinars that was included among the cultural projects for 2013. Like the public investments, private investments have been met with important problems. The committee to monitor the projects, the regional projects, 15 projects have been delayed in Saliana. And the main problems and challenges met, it is the large number of stakeholders and the lack of coordination among funders, problems of funding, the problem of lack of providing own funds, but also lack of infrastructure. This is part 1 of the documentary, which shows how a region that is marginalized economically, a heritage from the old system, but also the post-revolution governments, when they allocate funds, a good part of this is usually comes back. Why? Because projects are delayed, or that's why the people in Saliana feel that they are excluded and they are as if they are not part of the Tunisian state. Before we go back to the second part of the documentary, we will listen to a witness, Mr. Tayyib Krabit. Mr. Tayyib, you have the floor. Mr. Mohammed bin Salim will introduce Mr. Krabit.
Mr. Krabit Hagan. نقص في الفوليوم يا سيد.
بريت ما مش بقى.
Mr. Tayyib Krabit will give us his testimony. He was a victim of backshotting in Saliana, and he was at home when he was followed or sued by the officers, and he was attacked from behind. So this was absolutely useless and unnecessary, because he was not in any way near the governorate. And that's why we're going to give him the floor to explain the conditions whereby he was backshot. My name is Taib Krabti. On the 28th, I was in front of my house, and my house is near the governorate, and everything happened in front of me. All people who went away, and the police officers following the citizens and shooting sometimes, and also using tear lacrimonious, and these were absolutely terrorizing souvenirs I have. My own house was targeted by these lacrimonious gas, lacry gas, so nobody could stay in their places. Meanwhile, I was staying outside actually, and there were some people who were running, and they were chased by the police. So I was in front of my place. There was this water cistern that is perhaps 50 meters away from my place. I was simply moving. I was there and I was moving towards my own place. They attacked me, and there are violence impacts on my legs, and it's because I simply took the 3 steps for the stairway that I was saved, because if I did not take these steps, I would have been attacked on my head, and this would have been really fatal for me. Back then it was enormous suffering. I don't know how I pushed the door of my house and got in. I stayed there in the stairs. Those who saw how I was attacked were knocking the door. I don't know in what conditions I managed to open the door. You know, it was absolutely very, very, I mean, it causes pain. It is extremely painful. I was taken to the hospital by my neighbors. I can tell you that I have a very big quantity of back shots in my body. They could not take them off. Some of them are very deep, because the distance between me and the person who shot me was between 10 to 15 to 12 meters. So the quantity of back shot was quickly introduced in my body. After that, there was an association with Dr. Dengizli from Susa, from SUS. He's a university teacher and a doctor. He saw me and he tried to get them off my body, and he could not. And he said, listen, I strongly recommend that you don't take them off, because this back shot shooting actually attacked your nerves, and in case you get them out, probably you're going to lose your health. There are no soothing medicines. Until now, the suffering is there, the pain is there, in bathroom, everywhere. When I remember that, it's absolutely terrifying. After this period, we were taken to the trade union, Tunisian trade union. We had our medical certificate, and we were asked to provide the original version. And I had friends of mine who took radios of me and pictures also on the quantity of back shot that was lodged in my body. So they said, we're going to get in touch with you, go, and we're going to get in touch with you. there were some lawyers that promised to undertake this case, and they said that they were going to call us. Eventually, we were told that we were going to give our testimony in the National Guard. And they said that we had to bring our original certificate. We went back, therefore, to the trade union. We asked for it, and they said, we don't have it. He said, how come? They said, how come? We said, we gave you the original because you represent the authority in the country. They said, well, in this case, you need to go back and have other certificates. We went back to the hospital. The hospital said, then you have to go to the court, you have to have authorization from the head of the court. In this case, we were brought back to the hospital. Now, the hospital, the people in charge of the hospital said that now they are asked to provide a list, a final list, and those who were on the emergency list were not included. So I took this copy, and they said, we have stopped doing investigation. They took the first comers for the first and second day, and then we're not going to carry on. Well, every 2 days they were going to take to 30 or 40, depending on their capacity. They said, we were asked to stop taking testimonies. That's how we went to the office of Professor Ben Moussa. And they said, okay, we're going to get in touch with you. Until today, actually, nobody got in touch with us. When we go to the UGTT, we are told, okay, your name is there. Your name is number 91. Until now, nothing was done. We were not called. They did not take our words. It's the first time I actually talk about what happened in front of everybody. We are from Selena. We don't want problems. We want to have reconciliation. But we want to see who are the perpetrators, who are the decision makers. We want accountability, and we want to have compensation for all the damage that was caused to us. Because every time on the commemoration of Backshot in Siliana, they come from different parties and they say, listen, we're going to see how to improve things for you. From 2012 until today, 5 years later, we still have nothing. The government has not invited us, and the wrong done to us was not redressed. And the government did not even ask us for consolation. One of the kids, you know, he was, his father was coming back, and his father was not in a good mood. He pushed the child aside, and the child started crying. Now, this in itself is a message. The father can do wrong to the child, and the child can forgive. So this means that we are not at all against reconciliation, but it has to be accompanied by accountability. Now, we have always been victims, under Bourguiba, under Ben Ali, everywhere, and we have always been forsaken, forgotten. There are many things. Now, people know what happened in Selena, and personally, I am asking about my future. My situation is getting worse by the day. I was walking last time, and somebody simply, he called me, and then when I returned, he simply took my glasses off my eyes, I could not even run after him. I was crying, not for the pair of glasses, but because of for want of a better health that would allow me to go and chase him. Now, if this country does not ask for pardon and forgiveness, who is going to do so? We are part of the people of Tunisia and part of the government. The government, we have elected them, we have put them in this place. Also, I would like to ask about my own future. I have more than 100 back shots in my body. What is going to be the future of this? What can happen to me? The substance that is released by plum, what effect does it have on our body? One of the doctors told me, I would like to thank him, he said, we have to take one and then we're going to have biopsy to try and understand what it is made of and how the chair that is around it could be affected. Now, who is going to provide for my health services? And here I ask myself, is it the government who is ready to do this? Because, when I sleep, I don't stop itching. And you know what? My legs, I can never stop itching them. Some people might see me and they may think that I am having a very bad disease. But it's not the case, it's simply itching, these legs. Now, what we want to get is the government to give us back, to restore our dignity and to compensate for the damage that was realized for all victims, not only myself, in a way that the dignity is given back to people who lost one eye, one leg, things that are irreversible. Thank you very much, Mr. Taib. You had a very illustrative testimony. The problem is that your case or your file is not with the magistration, it's not with the Truth and Dignity Commission, which means that your right is simply lost. We're going to ask people, senior staff in the government, because you're not the only one that is suffering. I have all documents, madam. I'm not talking like that. We are sure of this. We hope that the government will find a solution so that the government takes this issue seriously. Thank you very much. Thanks. We're going to see other testimonies with the report of the Truth and Dignity Commission on this subject. After that, we're going to hear a second testimony, and eventually we're going to give you a documentary with the testimonies of people in charge in the government and perhaps activists in human rights. I hope this is going to be beneficial to all of you. In November 2012, there were movements and protests in many places like Sidi Bouzid, Gafsa, Kasserine and Kef. All of them were related to unemployment and marginalization of these regions, and many reasons were behind the instigation of violence in Syriana in 1214. The feeling of being marginalized and this feeling of resentment, because after the protests of 2011, that was known after the case of 206, what added fuel to oil was the fact that 0.58% were considered for employment, and for secondary schools it was only 12 recruited out of 1,500 with a rate of 0.51. What happened on the 21st of November 2012 led to the material violence applied to the Secretary General of the delegation. Now, many got into the office of the governor after the UGTT asked for a strike to call for the departure of the governor. And on that day, there was a massive march towards the governorate, and many people threw Molotov to the governorate in order to get into it. On the other hand, the police, the law enforcement officers used the lacrymo in order to prevent people from getting there. And these intervention units and the law enforcement officers were there to try and prevent more chaos. And the new director of the governorate was the one that took charge now that the governor was simply asked to or pushed to leave. The lacrimos reached the houses in the neighboring houses of the governorate, and this caused damage to women and children more than others. And this continued in Msikna, Salah, and Taib Lemhiri, where lacrimos were again sent, and there was a case of abortion, 2 cases of abortion, Neja Shaila and Bargawi. There were wounded, thousands of wounded, or hundreds at least of wounded, because of the attacks. Some of them have been treated there, but others, more dangerous and with more risk for their life, had been brought to Tunis. The police enforcement leadership continued to use backshots intensively, and there were many victims that were transported to Tunisian hospitals. The strike led by UGTT, regional trade union in Seliana, carried on, and the protesters stood in defense of their rights and to claim that the violence led against them needed to stop. Abdeslam Somrani, a newspaper, had his hand or arm broken, and Mr. Hamad Dijbeli, head of the government, only added to resentment in the region. Many youth closed the doors and all accesses to Siriana through tires and burned tires in Bargo, and in order to prevent law enforcement officers from joining. And we could see that there were 133 bruises and 53 arms or legs broken on that day. And the representative of the UGTT refused to intervene because of the enforcement intervention. Khaled Tarouche indicated that 3 police officers were simply set fire to in Burwis and Maktar and Bargo, where the protesters continued, and for 3 days protests were there to claim refusal of what was happening in the region, and many politicians went to Seliana in solidarity of its people, and this is when the law enforcement forces retreated or have withdrawn their forces. There was the symbolic march out of the city, and on the 1st of December, the governor of Seliana was pushed to resign, and the code of conduct for police officers as of the 17th of April 2017 insisted on the importance for police officers to play their role and assume the tasks that are assigned to them exclusively and as and when required. And Article 3 insisted or provided for the absolute necessity and appropriateness of the use of arms. And all officers that do not abide by this rule were subjected to investigation and eventually sued by court. The law on public meetings and all other types of groups were or referred to the conditions whereby the use of force was allowed, and it has to be progressive. You start with water and then follow with sticks, and then you fire in the air and then fire towards the legs and then to fire towards the body, the rest of the body, in case the citizen does not abide by the call to freeze. And well, as you can see, this what happened in Saliana did not. The officers did not at all use the principle of progression in the use of force. On the contrary, they have used lacrimos and they have sued citizens in their houses. Tunisia has ratified the Convention of Geneva for the use of arms under Protocol number 1 that concerned backshot shooting. And as you can see, Tunisia has afterwards been obliged to never to use this kind of arms on human beings. The TDC managed, through the study of the places where attacks took place, managed to come to the following conclusions. There was anarchic use of weapons, and this was shown also through the use of lacrimos during and after the shooting or the buck shooting. As you can see, there were also individual citizens that were targeted, which shows that the officers were not in any self-defense position. Now, this kind of immunity, it is, as you can see, forbidden both in Tunisia and internationally. It is the 2012 caliber, which gives for 2.5 and 2.25 millimeters. Most of the backshot shooters were young policemen. They were freshly graduated, and whereas the use of this one requires strong expertise and self-control in use. The arms used, the shoot guns or shuzan, or all others that are used in backshot shooting, gave us different bullets, and they had different calibers, speed, and they covered different distances. And they have different sizes depending on their use, and you can use unilateral bullets like the balls here that can start together and then explode once they get out of the rifle. Here you can see that on the 20th of November 2012, the number of victims was up to 383, and some of them, 14 actually, had to go surgery. 4 cases had to be taken abroad, and after that you could see that all the police officers that were involved were asked to give their own testimony, whereas the ministry simply refused to abide. Now, I was attacked first time with their sticks at the end of the road, and there were police officers. There were many people in the street. In the middle there was a girl that was hit with gas, so I was attacked the first time. Can you get this? And then I moved. Some people were on this side, so this was really massive protest. And they reached this place. I took the girl and tried to get her away on the other side. When I returned, I felt like a mosquito in my eye, and I could see blood running from my eye. This is a residential area. There is no state institution here. Even when people wanted to rescue me, the police officers were still attacking them. I have 14 back shots in my face, 2 in my eye. I had 2 operations in France, 2 in Belgium, and 1 in Tunisia. From December 4, that is to say the day I had the operation with Hedi Rice, down, but after that they went to France, and this was, I mean, the government paid for that, apart from the one where I had to pay for my own self. 5 years later, we're still waiting for dignity and truth and all the claims that pushed that out into the streets. Nothing happened eventually, and that's all. People went out from the governorate, and they were attacked from each and every side. People were fleeing the lacrimos, and my house was right in front. Tear gas. My wife was at home, and she was pregnant. The baby was in its 7th month. She aborted on the 28th of November 2012. I was hit here. I was standing near the taxi, the cab. He attacked me, and then he followed me. When I followed, some people joined me. Some people came with the tuk-tuk, and they were, nice citizens who took me to Sambla, and there the ambulance took me to the hospital for primary services. Now, nobody could ever imagine that any such a thing could happen. People were running; they did not have a clue, in all senses. So that's why when you see shooting took place from behind, and those who were shot in their face, they were terrorized. They could not believe what was happening. And those who were shot from behind, they were simply fleeing. The second day, I was in the hospital, and we started to get victims in uninterrupted periods. They wanted to get them in all different cities and villages. I think that was a very strong message on the part of the MOI. We can get you, we're going to chase you anywhere you are. I lost my eye, one eye, and the other eye is still damaged. I went to France, and it didn't succeed. I had 2 operations here in Tunisia, and in France I had 1/3 one. I was told that the retina was attacked. This is my right eye. After that, they went to Belgium. Yeah, that was the doctor who told me, Tarek, listen, the retina has been attacked, and you have a very large scare there. Large scar, sorry. Well, normally they should compensate for this and give us back the pay us back. I'm talking about what happened in 2014. We went there on Wednesday. We arrived before arriving to Sedene, we find that the streets were closed. But anyway, we made our way, and we arrived there. There was nobody. All you could see was police officers and gas, and this reminded me of the revolution days in Tunis. When we arrived, we put the car in front of the National Guard. People obviously were fighting against the BOP, but not the National Guard. We put our helmets and we went there.
When we arrived, we were not able to face the people were throwing stones at us. This person was showing us his body with all the buckshot, and then at that time we were shot again. Then we got these buckshot, David and I, but this person also that day. We found that the police found themselves stuck there and they could not do anything else but use maybe their guns. It is true that they often brought people who were who were injured, very much affected by buckshot. But when we talked to the police, for 3 days they were entirely isolated. They did not receive any even food at that time for 3 days. So we can say that for those who had this problem, they were affected by the buckshot. It could have it affected the eyes, it affected the skin, but it could actually be very harmful. In some cases, it led to loss of sight, 25%, 56%. This one had his 2 eyes shot. Now we will listen to the testimony of 2 women, one mother and her daughter, Mrs. Suad Tamalla and Sabrine Salami. And the 2 cases will be presented by Mrs. Ibtihal Abdel-Latif. We will listen to the testimony of Suad Tamalla, born in Siliana in 1960, and her daughter Sabrine Salami, born in 1995. Mrs. Suad is a housewife supporting her family, working in agriculture. She said that she left her home on the 28th of November 2012 with her daughter to have some to do some shopping, but few meters from her home she was the subject of gunshot and that affected various parts of her body. The neighbors took her to the hospital. Until today, the buckshot is still found in their bodies, and despite the pain suffered from time to time, this did not really discourage the daughter from continuing her studies while the mother is continuing her struggle for daily living. Good evening, I'm Suad Tamalla. I live in Cité Taïb Mhiri, a little bit far away from the governorate. That day my husband was not there. He was to attend a funeral in the countryside. And at home I had nothing for food and all the shops were closed. I had no flour, no pasta, nothing, no bread, nothing. So I took my daughter and we went to fetch some bread and some groceries. And while we just left, when I left the car, there is like 10 meters, we were shot. When we saw the gun aimed at us, we tried to hide. But the buckshot reached my daughter's neck and we started the bleeding both and we lost conscience. We did not remember what happened. From 6 o'clock in the morning, I woke up at 11 because suffering from problems of other health problems. And then I woke up at the time that they were trying to help me with vitamins and trying to remove the buckshot. At 9 o'clock at night, we were sent back home, but we had no other support. We were visited by no one, and we had no assistance from whomever. I used to work in agriculture. I used to assist in homes as domestic help. I used to do all work. My husband has a problem of sight, and my children go to school. Since that day, I cannot do much. At night, I can't sleep. All these pellets, this buckshot, and all the left side of my body, and I suffer very much from that. I cannot do much, and even my children suffered a great deal. My daughter here is studying at university, and my other son is unemployed. I am now helpless, and I cannot support my family. Even I have received no help, no assistance whatsoever. Nobody tried to console us or to try any form of support or assistance. Given our situation, that my husband now has a problem of handicap, so we really are helpless and desperate. As mentioned, I'm a management student in SUS. When I had the problem, when we had when we suffered this attack, I was 17 years old. We were still at home, almost in the neighborhood. There was a tree behind which there was a policeman hiding. And as soon as we appeared, we were like 30, 40 meters away from this policeman, and we were shot. He aimed at us and shot us directly. When I heard the gunshot, I looked at my mom, and I thought that it was only my mother. But then I realized that I was also injured. We were attended to by some of the people who took us to the hospital. There was only one doctor attending to the injured, all the injured taken to the hospital. There in the hospital, he tried to remove some of this buckshot, but then my hand remained swollen and all my aching, and we really suffered a great deal, and we thought that we would have some assistance or some help, that they would have some support to know what were the repercussions of this buckshot in our bodies. But until now, no one really tried to apologize or to explain what happened. Poverty is not the problem, but this humiliation, we want people to be responsible, to be held responsible for what happened. We are not asking for anything, but we want people to be held accountable for what they did. We want to know who ordered to shoot us like pigeons, men and women. They were shooting us inside our homes. Why? What happened? We are also Tunisian people. We belong to this nation. We thank God that we did not lose eyes or anything. I was in my knees. Imagine that at the age of 17, I would lose sight. All my future would be affected. And who would compensate for anything like that? No money, no moral compensation would help us obtain any form of reparation. But I know that as far as I know, such gunshots, these shotguns actually given to the police are used for hunting or killing beasts. But who ordered that this would be used against human beings? Now we are here to talk on behalf of all of the governors. There are people who actually came to the market for shopping, and they were trapped. There were even guests who arrived there, and they suffered a great deal, and they got shot. It was 3 days, 3 days in succession. We were oh, poor woman, I suffer a great deal. My life is a horrible one. And my husband, who's helpless, I used to be the only support for my family. I, I work in the fields and farms for 7-8 dinars a day. I bring that little money just to buy what my family would need. 7 years now, and I'm home. 7 years, I cannot do anything. Some people would help us with what we can, but my husband is helpless, and he's always receiving just support from some kind people. What did I do to get shot like that? Was I attacking anyone? I was there with my daughter trying to find the bread. For 2 days we did not have anything to eat. I'm suffering also, and I'm suffering. This impact had an impact on your studies. It did, but I had no other alternative but to overcome. My objective was to continue my studies in order to be able to find a job and help my family. Did you file a case in the courts? No one is paying heed to this, and even our names were not on the list of victims. They said that the lists we received certificates for the injured we suffered. When we often go and ask, I find no one who is in charge of this case. Where are you going? Where do you often go? To the hospital? In the trade union, they had no track of that. In the courts, there's no track of our case as victims. In the hospitals, we even contacted the lawyers. We often are sure to say, you have to thank God that you did not suffer any injuries in your eyes. But my daughter can testify that I cannot do much with all this buckshot under the skin, from head to toe. Just imagine that you have been living with this buckshot under the skin. It's very itchy in summer. You have an inflamed skin. Dr. Hamdoun told me that you have a serious problem, and I can't even sleep at night when it's very hot. Thank you, Suad. Thank you, Sabrine, for your testimony, and we hope that truth finally comes out. We move now to the third part of the documentary. As mentioned, and they are testimonies of political officials and human rights activists. Then we will have a last testimony by another victim. Mr. Ahmed Azine, governor, there was a big issue, and it raised the problem. It was behind the emergence of the problem in Siliana, and it was the state-owned lands, and it is what we call the developmental agricultural companies. We reviewed the specifications, and we found that the people who obtained these lands did not do what was required from them. So it was my duty to reconsider these. So in 10 months, we recovered about 10,000 hectares in the form of state-owned farms that were leased to private individuals. And with a number of other institutions, we started exploiting this land. And if we go to the figures, in 2012, the yield was very high. that the infrastructure was not sufficient for the warehousing of the produce. Then we tried to work on the industrial sites, and I think until now the situation as it is. Among the issues was also those who were recruited to work as part of the projects. When I reviewed the lists, I found that there was a large number of people who received salaries and were not working. I found that many of these people who were paid by the government were providing services to private homes. We also found that many people received free health care, and this raised a large number of problems. And this is part of the corruption problems, and which was at the origin of the issue and the conflict. We had another problem, and it was especially animal feed. This animal feed was taken by brokers, and it was smuggled to other places and never reached Siliana. So we tried to organize the supplies and took administrative measures so that those who would bring these or import these goods and the quantities should be sold in the area under the authority of the governor in order to avoid any form of speculation. And this also raised important problems for the governor. We had another problem, which was licenses for transport, which were the subject of nepotism. We tried also to discuss these matters, and we tried to adjust the situation, and we attributed authorizations to people who on the basis of meritocracy. So standing against this corruption was one of the problems that occurred in Siliana. This problem of the lack of communication between the governor and CSOs, in fact, there was only one organization that tried to boycott the governor, and this was the regional union office, UGTT, and we had one single meeting. And I was talking about development and cooperation with a solid partner that would play its important role in development Siliana. But the answer was, we don't have a problem with the governor, but we want to to see this government go. So I would like to say that on the 21st of November, about 5 p.m., there was an important problem between two clerks, the Secretary General of the union, of the local union, and the clerk at the governor's office. At this level, Mr. Ahmed Shafii intervened, despite the fact that I wanted to refer the secretary to disciplinary measures in order to continue with that. So about 8:30 in the morning, I heard some noise in the building and was surprised to find that Mr. Ahmed Shafii, with a large number of the regional UGTT office with about 100 and 150 people who by force entered the governorate and tried to oust the governor, Mr. Ahmed Shafii himself, who wanted to pull the governor, and I wouldn't let him do that. And he said, I am the first responsible here. I would not let anyone oblige me to leave the governorate. I would walk out feet first. When he heard this, he wanted to take these people outside, but they stayed there and they looted the area and they took documents and they broke chairs and furniture and destroyed the office entirely. And the siege, and that's I was under siege for until 5 p.m. Monday, we invited them, they did not come. On the same day, they decided to hold a general strike without respecting the general procedures of giving 10 days. Then a protest march started from the union office, and everyone headed to the governorate. There were about 5,000 people, but they were not all from Siliana. Initially, it was peaceful, and the police did not intervene. But very rapidly, the situation shifted to violence, and they tried to break into the governor's office, and the police intervened, but the violence was very important, so they were obliged to use tear gas, and then there were, of course, now an important clash. The police were trying to thwart the attack, and this continued for a few hours until I heard that all the tear gas was used, and the police were obliged to use gunshot, and I did not know about that. The day they broke into the office of the governorate, I had no responsibility. With the arrival of the regional police officials and officers, they were in charge. I was not consulted, neither before nor after the events. So in the final analysis, I would like to express again my support, my sympathy, and for Siliana and the people of Siliana, the youth of Siliana, and I hope that politicians and the important injustices in these regions, and the politicians and the leaders and the activists would join efforts to support this region that suffered a great deal from exclusion and marginalization. I hope the media remain alert and send positive messages that would make people more optimists about the future. We should not be in talk shows every day attacking each other, diabolizing one another with no respect, neither for president, nor for a minister, nor for a governor. Mr. Hamad Ijbeli, Prime Minister, December 2011, March 2013. I would say that the error is to be assumed by everyone, and no one would ever stay in the rule. The situation in the country and even the attitude of the opposition led to the aggravation of the situation. So everyone should be blamed for the results of this political crisis that led to assassinations, and which lead to this. And what leads to this is obstructing the democratic process, because these parties, we should identify them inside the country and outside the country. There are those inside the country who want to defy this and say that the revolution is over, and there are those in these who wanted to put an end to the democratic process, to this pioneering experience. And so Siliana, and other than Siliana, and burning offices and state offices is part of the plot against this process, because for those who have interests inside and outside the country, the corruption mafia and alliances which has been active since the Troika rule, and the regions especially, and those who were fearing that this dangerous contagion of the Constitution of human rights and freedom. So the problem actually is not the problem of the governor. Maybe in other places we would have considered that. But in seeking solutions, we would agree on that. But Saliena, the situation for me, the case is clear. It is targeting the government, targeting the state, even though there were errors from the governor on others, I would have replaced him. But there are errors that happened. And the Prime Minister and the Minister of Interior should assume their responsibilities. We would not defend errors. But in Saliena, the situation is clear. It is a planned attack. It is a political will, unfortunately, to support, unfortunately, the representative of UGTT and the executive committee breaking into the governorate and occupying the governorate's building from the outside, from the inside. There are certain procedural issues that should be adjusted and people should recognize. But there are certain things that are not part of the peculiarities, the strategic issues and public affairs. We were in the inception phase, the Constituent Assembly and a Constituent Government, and it was temporary. Yes, we were a temporary government. So our situation, maybe our task was to save the state and to ensure transition from a state to another. And we were part of the process of foundation process. So what was required is to accelerate this process of the transition. Some say that we had a contract or a deal, even if it is not a constitutional deal, it is true. I believe that in parentheses, we were caught in the trap of extension. They wanted to oust us, but they wanted to exhaust this experience and to exhaust the government. My blame is on the government, but my blame also in the Constituent Assembly that delayed things, and the Constitution was delayed, and going to the elections, establishing an elections authority and giving the opportunity to those who would succeed in the elections. So if there is any form of review or criticism, is that of not allowing ourselves to extend and to lengthen the process. And we are part of transitional, temporary, constituent phase. But it was evident for me that the counterpart, which claimed democracy, did not believe in democracy. The question of amnesty and appointments, that the Prime Minister would choose the ministers. Of course, in consultation with the Troika, the three parties, and the question of appointment. Every minister provides suggestions to the Prime Minister, who would discuss that with them, and sometimes would request adjustments and then would approve them. We had such traditions. Concerning information, during that time, I did not monitor the situation in situ, and the police, the Ministry of Interior Affairs monitored the situation, but through the reports and witnesses, it was confirmed that the governor and the governorate, as a sovereign state office, where the governor life was under threat. The political environment about which I talked and the deliberate planning or plotting was not something free, but it's not Saliena. But Saliena was chosen, but it was all over the country. And then there was the call to oust the government using any legitimate means. This was the statement. Mr. Ali Daraid, the Interior Minister from 2011 to 2012. We're talking about November 2012. There were so many protests that took place, maybe similar to those now in 2011. Also, there was also a problem of blocking roads, etc. But in Saliana, it started on the 22nd of November. Protests started claiming development in the governance of Saliana, led by the UGTT local office, and the security officers did not intervene. They were just monitoring the process, whether it was an assembling or it was a protest march, although it was a state of emergency and this would be announced. These events continued, but they were violent. So one government office was burned down. One fiscal office, taxation office, was looted and burned down. Police cars were burned down. Police officers were attacked. So what was adopted during this process, the use of Molotov bombs, including also use of stones and sticks and all of those means, to the extent that the police in the region were not able to keep public order. And so people were fearing for their businesses and shops. So as known in the general security process, the local security forces would be supported by others. Although this governor, who was blamed for development, in the rating at the time, Saliana ranked third in terms of efficiency of the work of the governor. Some of the most important achievements is that the state recovered about 10,000 of public-owned lands that were either exploited or were attributed to people who did not fulfill the conditions. And this was one of the problems behind this, because many of those who rebelled against him were actually people who had interests, and they mobilized for another general strike behind the events known as the Buckshot events in Saliana. So in my consideration, people were under ideology, but they were also claiming that they were unionists, but they were also behaving in different ways. So after they met and assembled in front at the UGTT office and marched to the governorate, and the police did not intervene. But when they approached and they tried to break into the building, when they were asked not to intervene, they tried to break into the building, and they were warned many times. And then finally, the policemen around the building, they found themselves in a very critical situation. And after using all forms of warning and using tear gas, and they were the target of different means of attacks, stones, etc., but they found themselves in a very critical situation, whether to use bullets or to find themselves using, and what is more dangerous. So apparently some of them have used what is known as buckshot, which hurts and can really cause damage within a certain distance, that is over 20, 30, it would scare, but normally it does not hurt. So it would be used, they wanted to use it to try to put an end to this attack. Unfortunately, after a large number of these police were injured and attacked, and many of their vehicles were burned down, and after some looting, there were even some tear gas, and tear gas guns were taken by these people. So between using the bullets and using buckshot and using gunshot, they opted for this second. And when they found that actually when their colleagues who were in prison at that time and used bullets, real bullets, despite the fact of their legitimate use. They found themselves under arrest and trialed and in prison. So when the people scattered, they were not obliged to use it. But then I found that there were victims. The victims were being taken to hospital, so I ordered that they stop using this type of a gunshot. And so, by all respects, when the police forces face such protests, it is the field leadership that is responsible and should manage the situation because they don't have time. When would they consult their their superiors, and even it would reach the minister or the president, when they would plan an operation ahead? But this was taking place on the ground. And instructions would be received from the operations room at the ministry, which was under the authority of the Director of Public Security, and who would also give instructions that was part of his powers, but also under the monitoring of the minister. So anyway, the first one legally responsible for instructions given through the operations room is the minister. But the first one to be responsible at practical level is the General Director of Public Security. So in all respects, for serious injuries in the eyes or others, and we know that a large number of police officers also, tens of them, were injured. The second thing I want to say, we were never loose on this.
Permissive.
We did not take this decision as an easy decision.
Personally, for me, it happened months before I joined. We had already a lot to do, as you can imagine. And this general situation was rather explosive. We had more than 11,000 protests that required police intervention. And 20,000 protests, as you know, this is not an easy thing to handle. Ministers themselves could not work. They could not join their offices. When you send your enhancement and support forces to simply allow ministers to join their offices, this was, as you can see, not an easy matter. Following a meeting, the Security Council, it seems, decided to use the backshot shooting when pressure around the governor's office was not under control anymore. They did not expect to have, obviously, human losses. Indeed, the point was to avoid using real bullets in order to avoid deaths and casualties. So they resorted to a backshot, because when you target the mass, you cannot, however, control the consequences. The confrontation depended on situations, and this was decided by field or ground officers. It was the officers who simply decided what weapon to use and the way to use it, technically speaking. But support was the Director General of Security Forces that was tasked with this decision. So they were the ones who would decide what munitions to bring in this region and what munitions to bring in another one. So this was therefore the task of the Director General of Security Forces, because they had the ones that knew what munitions they had in the barracks. However, the strategy is the one that is done by the ground commander. When I the first leaflets that were published were, as you can see, ones that insisted on the prohibition of backshot use. There are some people who are in charge of equipment. And we have the law on confrontation, which concerns the use of real bullets, the progressive use of force. However, backshots were never considered for any confrontation with the protesters. They were never considered for that. It's not a weapon or munition that is used in these situations. But it was eventually used in the south, and we had one who died because of that. The question is that back then we didn't have equipment. We were running short of equipment. In many governorates, you will see that there are protests. In Gabes, for instance, there were very important protests, and the governor was changed. Many governors actually worked within the walls of their offices, and they were guarded by civil forces and sometimes military forces. The events of Celiana and the protests and the claims for growth, economic growth and development, all of this was legitimate back then, and this is what happened. However, the background, the real motivations go far behind. Maybe there we need to go back to the beginning of 2012, following the elections of October, as regards the National Constituent Assembly. The declaration that the people was wrong when they voted for these people. How could we give these people, how could we trust them with the future of the country, people who have spent years and years in prison? So this was, as you can see, a discourse that was absolutely conducive to violence. And on the other hand, the Troika and the authorities that stepped out of the National Constituent Assembly had also a sharp tone when they answered these attacks. They said they represented 0.0, and these are the victims of Francophonia, and Francophonie if you want. And this was, as you can see, this was not at all compatible with the situation, because the struggle between the two poles, the poles that had in hand the legal legitimacy and the second pole that had the militant legitimacy, and for all their different positions and stances, they were comrades coming from different backgrounds. So they were not supposed to have this kind of talk. The two poles were not supposed to have this kind of talk and to go that low. In this framework, we had a real issue with regards to appointments. Mr. Laid, Minister of MOI back then, asked me to go there and try and find a solution. When we went there, we found Mr. the Governor. We had a small chat with him on the situation, and back then we could already feel that the governorate was surrounded with danger. I could hear the glasses of the governorate office broken by people who threw stones at them. So that's how we decided to leave the governorate office. People, or the stakeholders that were against each other in the region, are called on to have a dialogue to avoid confrontation. And sometimes, very small incidents may lead to national catastrophes. The dialogue was open, and indeed relationship with the social partners like UGTT, UTICA, and all official partners, social partners, was carried out and continuously. So therefore, there was no doubt as regards political responsibility. And this goes back to the minister in charge, that is to say the minister of the MOI, and this means obviously the government. Back then, the members of the government were not responsible for the use of backshot shooting. But this is not the case for the Minister of the Interior. Now the Al-Nahda movement, the MOI, expressed somehow their desire to have activists from Al-Nahda party occupy state positions. Now, whether they had the capacity of communicating with the civil CSOs and others, this was not always the case, and we have called for an assessment of the work of the governors. And this led to, if you want, the lack of confidence in the government. And you can see that this is also related to the capacity or incapacity of the government to get out of such situations and settle the problem. In Siliana, the governor managed eventually to have relations with CSOs and with social partners like the UGTT in order to avoid this problem. Indeed, we have reached some kind of peace after the backshot events. So this perhaps could be seen in the state's desire to regain its prestige and authority. And sometimes nothing happened, but this was simply an objective situation that led to crisis. On the other hand, people who got appointed had to be defunded. There was one first attempt in October 2012, a big meeting in the Congress following the call of the UGTT to get the 4 stakeholders to come and discuss. And the government, under the head of the government, answered positively, together with the head of the National Constituent Assembly. Many parties, like CPR and Al-Nahda, refused to attend. For them, it was an attempt to break with the legitimacy of the elections. So the genuine kickoff took place perhaps later. The investigation took 6 days. We collected all data. We talked to the person in charge with the MOI and with Mr. Mishishi, who was Secretary of State with the MOI. And they also provided us with information, whether through figures and statistics related to the number of casualties that were included in the 3 different security units, from the National Guard, from law enforcement, and field officers who were directly targeted for this backshot event. And they came from different law enforcement units in the government and from 3 troops. You have Baja, Gafsa, and the central troop of the capital. We took this information from the MOI, pictures, together with pictures and answers provided by the MOI as regards accusations addressed to them. either from the protesters or from the media people sometimes. And some information came from the official authorities. The MOI, they said that some of their officers was attacked with a sharp weapon by one of the protesters. When we went there, we found out that he was not at all targeted, but simply the door of the police vehicle, simply the door was closed inadvertently and it hit him on the face. And as you can see, they started a whole terror campaign when we faced them with information. As you can see, some of the law enforcement officers were simply interns. Some have not even conducted or completed their training with the police academy. And as you can see, the small backshots were not coming from the usual size of 1 millimeter. Here it was between 3 and 5 millimeters, and this kind of balls, backshot balls, as was explained by specialists, is the distinctive feature of this kind of balls. The size that was used made them capable of getting through the body, and they could be stopped only by the bones. And this explains why they were lodged in places of the body whereby it became difficult afterwards to extract them. So if we say that in Celiana the National Guard was targeted and the protesters set fire to this, yes, but after the use of backshots. On the evening of the 28th, nothing was under control because Celiana was simply accompanying their victims. The driver who came out of the hospital of Celiana was attacked by the law enforcement guards in Fusa, something like 4 to 6 kilometers from the governorate office, and he was prevented from getting any rescue. There were no material or legal evidence to show that some other institutions were set fire to. All events, as you can see, were around the geographic surrounding of the governorate office. There were some important harm done to the cars, vehicles, and on the 27th, you could see this was the day of purchases and sewing. This did not at all include the downtown of Celiana, but rather the police, as you could see, now would chase citizens until their houses. Some of the tear gas, which was imported from the US, and others were they traced back to 1984, which means that they have gone well beyond their best before practice time. And this is why we found Madame Nejia Shalia, who lost her baby and aborted there and then, because the tear gas was thrown in her patio. Well, there was also excessive use of force when confronting the protesters, sometimes by the bystanders, people who were just curious and wanted to see what was happening. And they were targeted. Some of them were driven over, and it seems, therefore, there was a national decision to contain this protest and to prevent it from joining other delegations in Saliana. This eventually added, as we say, oil to fire, and this is due to their incapacity to face the attacks waged by the police forces. And it was the evening when they started feeling that they were neglected, marginalized, and somehow disowned by this country. Backshot shooting was used on the 27th. And let me say, it was used actually before in the US Embassy events and Duar Hisha events, but it was used with a caliber of 1 millimeter. Now, whereas this one was of 3 to 5 millimeters, and it is destructive. And therefore, decisions taken by the regional authorities, as you can see, this decision was made at the regional level, so that from the beginning of the backshot, the central leadership could simply see the destructive capacity of this weapon, and also they could see the increasing number of victims. And from the media, public and private media, and even international media, have shown casualties and victims. Yet they were heedless. They continued to provide munitions to the police officers in order to which caused more harm. As you can see, information was centralized, but there is evidence on carrying on stubbornly with the same instructions. As you can see, this authority within the MOI is run under or provided for by the law of 2007, so that this unit, in the light of violations that we could see on the ground, on the side of the law enforcement officers. As you can see, the legal responsibility is thrown on the shoulders of the Director General of Law Enforcement. We're not talking about the scapegoats. I would like to put myself in the position and play, or in the shoes of the lawyer that will defend such an individual now, because if they did not apply the instructions, or in what way can they be considered guilty? And again, in what way can they be considered guilty if they were now asked to decide on the use of arms of a different caliber? In Siliana, you can see that these officers could not take off their boots for more than 48 hours. They did not have food. As you know, famine or starvation could lead people to lose a lot of their humanity. So yeah, this could stand in defense of law officers. Now, the document on which we based this report, it is a pillar as regards the criminal forms that this take. It is precisely one that emanates from, that is held within the MOI, because it's an internal report. Mr. Abdelhamid Bouzidi was a candidate on an electoral list, legislative electoral list, on the governorate of Mahdia, rank 4, and he represented Nida. I consider personally, and this is my own opinion, it does not therefore engage the authority that produced this report, but rather the individual that was in charge of authenticating this report. It also indicates the perpetrators, those who have wanted to make a display of their force.
Minutes. Saliana has been marginalized throughout the ages for many reasons. Let's say there was no will over the last decades and since independence. In 1990, it witnessed protests to denounce marginalization. There were arrests, homes were broken into, and the situation was dealt with in security terms. Saliana does not have resources? One would ask this question. No. It has important natural resources and important skills during colonization and even before. Academics and poets and intellectuals, but most of them left the place. Saliana is highly rich in historical sites. It was the home to Hannibal, home to the Zama, prestigious Zama site. But until now, there are no museums in this region. It's one of the most attractive sites, and the natural resources there are extremely attractive and important. Very attractive for cultural tourism, but it has been neglected. Saliana is agricultural with fertile lands. I give the example of Krib, Bargo, and a number of other regions that are highly fertile, but the problem is that there is no encouragement, there is no complete and full strategy over the decades to encourage tourism, to develop the plans, to develop manufacturing. There are, for example, no mills, no agro-food factories. Saliana has natural water resources. From Ain Bousadia, this water used to be channeled to Carthage of very high quality. And those who go to Bousadia, they think they're in Switzerland. But there are no hotels in the region. This is exclusion. Roads, infrastructure, in very bad situation. So why do we wait until now to have a regional transport network or company? Why would we have just one school for elites? So this led to a feeling of exclusion. Saliana is my hometown, but the town has never developed. There are a number of work sites, but I think that dealing with the events was in security terms. According to the reports, when the sit-inners wanted to meet with the governor, he refused, and some wanted to break into the governorate, and tear gas was used. The report says that this tear gas was manufactured in 1984. It expired, and then in the afternoon, some of them were tracked down. Some youth responded after the attack, but they were tracked down. And they were punished collectively. They were tracked down in the alleys and in the streets and in the neighborhoods using buckshot. On the 28th of November, buckshot was used intensively, which was forbidden. It was used people were shot in their backs. That means you were shooting people who were running away from you. Evidently, the report says that many of the security officers the police officers were new recruits. So symbolically, the people walked miles out of town, leaving the town behind, and it really, really touched us because our hope that this would not happen again. We want the people of Saliana to stay in Saliana, develop their region, but this requires political will and resources. Democratic transition is challenged as long as there is no economic transition and there is no positive segregation laws. The last testimony, we will listen to Mr. Ali Barrari. So Mazir would introduce the case. The question asked by Saliana people often, why were we the ones targeted with buckshot, unlike those who were targeted in other regions, so that the identity of the people of Saliana became associated with the Saliana. That one poet wrote a whole collection of poems about we were buckshot. In this context, Ali al-Brari mentioned that his brother, Hamd al-Brari, who was 16 years old at that time, on the 28th of November, went downtown for shopping at the local market where the police was tracking down a number of protesters. Hamdi was surprised as a police officer shot at him from a police vehicle 5 meters away from him, and he was all his body was targeted, and then he was transferred to the local hospital and then to the Eyes Hospital in Tunis, where he underwent 2 surgeries for the 2 eyes in order to extract the buckshot in the eyes. But because of the serious injury, the team, the doctors could not remove the pellets, as the pellets were too deep. Hamdi was sent to Paris along with other victims to spend in Val-de-Glace Military Hospital, where he underwent important diagnosis and operations. But the operation was very dangerous and very risky. From there, he was transferred to Belgium, where the treatment continued for different intervals, but without any results, especially after infection, which obliged the doctors to remove the eye and replace it with an artificial one. Mr. Hamd al-Brari dropped school, and the incident impacted him psychologically, especially when doctors informed him that he was also risking losing the right eye, which made him forget entirely about going back to Tunis. Then he settled in France illegally, and apparently he left to an unknown place, and since then nobody had any news about him. Good evening, I'm Ali al-Brari, Hamd al-Brari's brother. I wanted to say a few words about Saliana. Saliana is excluded, marginalized. We are an experimentation field where they tried their weapons. On Wednesday, my brother went to school. And like all young people, he took his lunch, and then he returned and he said that they did not have classes. I asked him to stay with me and my veggies and fruit shop. He stayed with me. Then I had no more bags. I sent him to go and buy bags. He stayed about 10 minutes and he did not come because the place is just a couple minutes. Then my other brother, Henny, said, go, and I cannot find your brother. My other brother went and did not come back. 10 minutes later, one of my neighbors called me and said, your brothers are in the emergency. And I was informed that they were transferred to Tunis. Then the story started. Saliana, a large number of people from Saliana were there. He underwent 2 surgeries. Then they were transferred to France. Then he was transferred again to Belgium, where he underwent 4 surgeries. Then he came back to Saliana. It was okay, but then we would be sitting. He would say, he would be closing one eye and say, I can see some light. We would be very happy when he says that. The next day he says, I can't see the light anymore. So then everybody's morals collapsed. And saying, one day he was looking at the documents and said, this is the doctor's report. I'm 10 years older than my brother, and he used to call me his dad. So one day we took him to Tunis just to have a day off. Then we went to the doctor to see the documents. And he said that he was given an appointment because in 20 days he was supposed to they were supposed to extract the whole eye because the eye was infected. I went home and told my father, we tried to contact everyone here and there, but nobody wanted to provide any assistance. We were obliged to sell our house. Imagine that a life's toil was sold, and with that money we were obliged to treat my brother. So when the doctors were talking, he said, as the eye is infected, the other eye is infected, it is possible that this other eye would also be damaged in 17 years maybe. They took him to a center for orphans who had no support. My brother lost contact with us gradually, and I felt that he changed a great deal. Just imagine, look at his eyes. That is 16 years. His eye is swollen. Look at his eye, totally lost. We did our best. Through relatives and others, we tried to support him, etc. But he did not accept the shock, especially that he would, at the age of 22, he would go entirely blind. Over 1 year now, often we get information that he was seen in certain places here or there, especially by those who live in France, of our relatives. The last time he was sleeping in a train station, his documents were stolen, his phone, the money that he had, his passport. So my request is that the state help repatriate my brother. He was destroyed both physically and psychologically. We have no information about him at all. That he had undergone all this pain, that they would help. Some people have lost sight entirely. Some people can't sleep. You there in the office, those who are here, and you have your kids next to you, when you see your brother or your son in a situation like this, Can you sleep at night? Whether you ordered or you did not order anything of this type. No, just doing things for these. These people who have lost the dearest things to them, like their sight. These people who have lost everything dear to them. Now we are I am supporting now everyone. We lost our home. We lost everything. We lost that life we had as a family. Now I'm paying rental. But all of this, I would like to thank those who supported my brother, Mr. Ahmed Shafi'i and Mr. Heidi Atiawi, who provided all the support to my brother. Thank you. Thank you, Ali. I think you have delivered the message on behalf of all the people of Salyanna. We hope that the state will assume their responsibility. We thank you all, and we meet again, hopefully, in one of the coming sessions. Thank you.
شفت